Good to see you. I'm Jaxon from Animal Encounters. Today we're looking at rich people who were eaten alive by dangerous animals, from a crocodile ambush on an Australian cattle station to a midnight hippo charge on a Kenyan garden lawn. We start in Australia's top end, where a mining CEO walking his investors to the river at sunset had no idea what was sitting in the shallows. It was November 14th, 2016, and the wet season heat had settled over Australia's top end. Daytime temperatures pushed past 38 degrees Celsius, and the tidal rivers that cut through the region's pastoral stations ran murky with sediment. The wet season had increased crocodile activity, especially among dominant males defending territory. Caius Whitfeld, a 52-year-old lithium mining CEO based in Perth, had bought a 600,000-acre cattle station in the remote top end 4 years earlier. It wasn't primarily a working investment. It was a prestige property, a corporate retreat, a place to entertain high-value clients far from boardrooms. Whitfeld flew in quarterly and used the property to host investors over multi-day trips with helicopter tours, barramundi fishing, and dinners under the stars. This particular visit centered on 3 foreign mining investors. The day had gone well. As the light started to go, Whitfeld suggested walking the group down to the river to catch the sunset from a rough timber viewing platform he'd had built on a cleared stretch of bank. Darcy Keogh, the station's 46-year-old manager who lived on the property year-round, pulled Whitfeld aside before the walk. He'd spotted a large male saltwater crocodile basking on a sandbar about 200 yards upstream for the past week. The rising wet season activity made dominant males even more territorial and unpredictable. He wanted the group kept well back from the water. Whitfeld waved him off. He'd walked this bank dozens of times. I think about ownership a lot when I read through this one. Whitfeld's name was on the deed for 600,000 acres, and I genuinely believe he felt that meant something to the river. It didn't. The crocodile that owned that tidal stretch had been there longer than the fence posts. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with dominant males in the top end regularly exceeding 16 feet. They're ambush predators with extraordinary patience, nearly invisible in murky water before striking with explosive speed. Their jaws generate among the highest bite forces ever measured in any animal. The attack follows a reliable pattern: a sudden lunge from concealment, clamping the target, then dragging it into deeper water where drowning becomes the cause of death. Breeding season concentrates territorial males into defined stretches, and movement at the water's edge can trigger an ambush response. Keogh later told investigators the group had been on the bank for less than 10 minutes. Whitfeld stood closest to the water, about 5 feet from the waterline, pointing out features on the far side of the river. Keogh hung back near the platform, around 40 feet behind. He said he was uneasy the entire time Whitfeld stayed that close to the bank. The crocodile came out of the shallows in an explosive surge of water and jaws. It clamped onto Whitfeld's lower body with tremendous force and wrenched him off his feet. Keogh described a single shout, a massive spray of muddy water, and Whitfeld going under the surface in seconds. The investors stumbled backward. Keogh sprinted back toward the ATV, where the station rifle was locked in a mounted case. By the time he got back, less than 3 minutes later, the river had gone flat. No movement, no sound. 3 minutes. Keogh told investigators he ran faster than he'd ever moved in his life. And when he got back with the rifle, the river looked the same as it always did. I've been sitting with that image for a while now. A man sprinting back to save someone and the water's already pretending nothing happened. 5 feet from the waterline. I keep measuring that out in my head. That's less than the length of a dining table. Every croc expert I've ever heard talk about tidal rivers in the top end says the same thing. If you can see the water, you're close enough. They got through to emergency services on the satellite phone. A search team reached the station the next morning. Crews recovered partial remains several days later near submerged timber downstream. A large male croc, estimated at over 5 meters, was identified in the stretch. Wildlife officers noted the station had no formal safety protocols for guests near tidal waterways, despite repeated croc sightings. Authorities reviewed the station's procedures, but no criminal findings followed since Whitfeld had ignored direct warnings about the riverbank. I've gone back and forth on this one because Keogh did everything right. He warned him, he stayed back, he ran for the rifle, and none of it mattered. Because the person who owned the property decided he knew better than the person who actually lived on it. That gap between ownership and understanding is what killed Caius Whitfeld. And I don't think the investors who watched it happen will ever set foot on a riverbank again. The river took him and went still. I keep coming back to that. The next story got to me for a different reason, though. The danger wasn't hidden at all. It was standing in the middle of the road. It was March 8th, 2015, and a drier stretch of weather had settled over Sri Lanka's central highlands. Tea country rolled in neat geometric rows across the hillsides, giving way abruptly at the buffer zone to dense tropical forest, tangled and green, and getting smaller every year. Lakshitha Ehelipola, a 58-year-old third-generation tea plantation owner, ran one of the largest private estates in the district. The family's holdings covered several hundred hectares. Human-elephant conflict along the buffer zone had been getting worse for years. Decades of expansion had broken up the forest corridors elephants once used to move freely. The animals now crossed private land regularly, running into vehicles on narrow estate roads. That evening, Ehelipola was heading back from inspecting a newly cleared section at the estate's edge. His foreman, Samira Wickremage, a 34-year-old who'd worked for the family for 9 years, was driving the estate's older Land Rover Defender. The road was narrow, hemmed in by drainage ditches, running right along the buffer zone. Dusk was settling fast. They came around a bend, and the headlights lit up a large adult elephant in the road about 40 yards ahead. Ears spread wide, trunk raised, body squared toward them. Wickremage slowed right away. Standard practice in conflict zones was to stop, kill the lights, and wait. Wildlife officers had said over and over that honking or flashing lights at an agitated elephant only made things worse. Here's where this story turns for me. Wickremage grew up around elephants. He knew what a flared-ear posture meant. He knew you don't provoke it. But Ehelipola told him to hit the horn and flash the headlights. And Wickremage was a foreman, not the owner. I've thought about what I would have done in that seat, and I honestly don't know. Ehelipola told Wickremage to flash the headlights and lay on the horn, an outdated technique that wildlife authorities had been warning against for years. Wickremage hesitated, then did what he was told. Asian elephants are among the largest land animals on Earth, with large bulls weighing several tons. Human-elephant conflict in Sri Lanka kills dozens every year as habitat loss pushes elephants through fragmented corridors. Displaced elephants are stressed and react aggressively to perceived threats. When one charges a vehicle, it hits with enough force to crush panels, shatter glass, or even overturn lighter vehicles, and will keep attacking long after the first impact. Wickremage later told investigators the elephant responded immediately. A mock charge first, a short explosive lunge before pulling up short. Wickremage threw the Defender into reverse, but the narrow road and the drainage ditches on both sides meant he could only crawl backward. Then it charged for real. The elephant closed the gap in seconds and hit the Defender head-on, crumpling the hood and shoving it backward. It struck again, driving into the passenger side with its full weight, forcing the vehicle into the ditch. Wickremage got thrown against the driver's door, but managed to pull himself out through the window. Ehelipola, sitting on the impact side, was pinned as the cabin collapsed around him. The elephant kept ramming and pressing against the vehicle with its head. By the time it backed off and moved into the darkness, the passenger side of the old Defender was crushed inward, almost to the center console. The part of this story I can't leave alone is the 3 generations. His grandfather cleared the first hectares. His father expanded the estate into the buffer zone. Lakshitha inherited the fortune and the land. And the same corridor they'd been shrinking for 60 years funneled a displaced elephant right onto his road. I don't think you could write a more complete circle if you tried. Wickremage made it to the estate house on foot and raised the alarm. Workers and wildlife officers pulled Ehelipola from the wreckage. He'd taken fatal crushing injuries. Wildlife officers believed it may have been a locally known animal with distinctive ear damage, frequently seen near the corridor. Investigators pointed to the estate's expansion into the buffer zone as a contributing factor. Officials chose not to destroy the elephant, citing the corridor encroachment driving these encounters. Wickromage still works on that estate, from what I've been able to find. I wonder if he drives that road at dusk now, or finds another way around. I wonder if anyone on that estate ever uses the horn anymore. Sri Lanka's hill country showed me something I keep turning over. The money didn't just put a helipola in the wrong place, it built the wrong place around him, one generation at a time. The next story is almost the opposite, though. In southern Tanzania, a man's wealth didn't reshape the landscape. It just bought him a tent in the middle of it, with nothing between him and the night except canvas, and a rule he decided not to follow. It was June 3rd, 2017, and the dry season had tightened its grip on southern Tanzania. A seasonal river through a private wildlife concession had shrunk to a sluggish brown channel, and wildlife was piling up along what water remained. The concession ran an ultra-luxury fly camp, temporary canvas tents, open-air mess area, no permanent structures, no fences, no barriers, 4 tents max. At over $2,000 per person per night, the premium bought solitude and proximity. You slept with nothing between you and the African night except canvas. Suraur Al-Ketbi, a 48-year-old Emirati real estate developer out of Abu Dhabi, had booked the entire camp for a private stay with 2 business associates. Al-Ketbi collected extreme luxury experiences across continents, but his previous African safaris had all been lodge-based, behind electrified perimeters and solid walls. Baraka Msigwa, the camp's 41-year-old head guide with 14 years in the bush, briefed all 3 guests on arrival. The rules were simple and absolute. Don't leave your tent after dark. If you need the latrine, get on the radio and wait for an armed escort. 2 night watchmen walked the perimeter with flashlights from dusk until dawn. The first 2 days were extraordinary. Close lion sightings, a leopard at dusk, buffalo at the river. At night, the sounds never stopped. Hyenas, distant roars, animals passing through the darkness near the tents. Over $2,000 a night to sleep behind canvas in lion country. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand what that buys you, and I think the answer is a feeling. The feeling that you're in the wild without actually being exposed to it. But the canvas doesn't know it costs $2,000. Neither does the lion. June 3rd, around 4:30 in the morning. Still pitch dark. The scene told a clear story. Al-Ketbi's tent flap was unzipped from the inside. His sandals sat on the path toward the camp latrine, about 20 yards from his tent. Investigators figured he'd left on his own, without radioing for an escort. 20 yards. I measured that out in a parking lot once just to see what it felt like. It's nothing. You could throw a rock that far without trying, and somewhere in that nothing, between the tent and the toilet, a resident male lion was moving through the camp. African lions are among the continent's apex predators, with adult males commonly topping 400 pounds. They're most active between dusk and dawn. In concession areas, prides used to camp presence occasionally pass through unfenced perimeters, but they're still fully wild. In rare cases, a lion familiar with human proximity may investigate a solitary person on foot at night, especially at close range where the encounter turns reactive. The night watchman was on the far side of the perimeter, about 60 yards away. He heard a heavy impact, a brief vocalization, then low growling. He ran toward it with his flashlight. He found Al-Ketbi on the ground, on the path between the tents and the latrine. Large male lion had backed off a few yards, but was still visible at the edge of the darkness. The askari shouted and swept his beam toward it. The lion lingered just beyond the light before slipping back into the darkness. Msigwa got there within minutes with the rifle. He fired into the ground beside the path. The lion moved off into the darkness. Al-Ketbi wasn't responsive. He'd taken severe trauma to the neck and shoulder. The lion appeared to have brought him down before biting into the neck and upper throat area. I read somewhere that the other 2 guests in camp didn't hear a thing until the warning shot. They were 20 yards away, sleeping, and a man was killed on the path outside, and they slept through it. That's how fast and how quiet it was. Msigwa radioed for evacuation. The nearest airstrip that could handle a medevac was over an hour out. Al-Ketbi was dead before the aircraft got there. The lion turned out to be a known resident male that staff had seen near camp perimeters before during dry season. It wasn't pursued. The investigation found the camp's protocols met industry standard. Al-Ketbi had walked out without an escort, directly against the safety briefing. The concession added stricter nighttime escort enforcement and low-level perimeter lighting near guest paths. Low-level path lighting and stricter escort rules. That's what it took. A man had to die on a 20-yard walk before the concession put dim lights along the guest paths and started physically escorting every movement after dark. I keep thinking about how simple those changes are and how obvious they seem now. Staff had warned guests for years, but no previous violation at that camp had ended in a fatal encounter. Next up is a story that sat with me longer than any of the others. Not because of the violence, but because of one detail that made survival impossible. A man went down in a river, lost his footing, and after that, there was almost nothing anyone could do. It was September 12th, 2014, and the rivers of Kamchatka Peninsula ran dark with spawning sockeye. The salmon migration had hit its peak, pulling the highest concentrations of brown bears on the planet into the river corridors. Every good pool, every gravel bar had bears on it. The fishing lodge sat on a raised bank above a remote tributary, reachable only by helicopter. A 3-day stay ran upward of $15,000. 4 clients, max. Armed guides, strict bear protocols. Sava Pashkov, a 51-year-old Moscow-based metals industry magnate, had flown in the day before. His wealth ran into the hundreds of millions, and his thing was extreme sport fishing in hard-to-reach places. Alaska, Patagonia, Mongolia, Kamchatka was the crown jewel. He was a big man, deeply confident, and figured he knew his way around bears from earlier trips to Alaska. His guide was Stepan Gorelikov, a 44-year-old wilderness professional with 12 years on Kamchatka's rivers. Gorelikov carried a heavy-caliber rifle and bear spray, and he made the rules clear to every client. If a bear comes near your water, get out. Yield the river. No fish is worth it. Day 2. Around 8 a.m., Pashkov waded into the river in chest-high neoprene waders to work a productive pool about 200 yards downstream from camp. The water ran thigh to waist deep over uneven cobblestone, current steady but manageable. Gorelikov set up on the bank roughly 50 yards upstream, watching the brush line. I've worn chest waders exactly once in my life, on a much smaller river than this one. Even in slow current over a sandy bottom, you feel how much control you're giving up. Your legs move differently, your balance shifts, and the whole time there's this awareness that if you go down, the current and soaked gear will make it almost impossible to stand back up. Pashkov had fished in waders all over the world, and that familiarity probably made him feel bulletproof. Familiarity does that. About 30 minutes in, Gorelikov spotted a large male brown bear pushing out of dense alder on the far bank, maybe 60 yards downstream. The bear dropped into the water and started upstream toward Pashkov's pool. Head low, steady pace. Gorelikov shouted for Pashkov to get out of the water. Brown bears on Kamchatka are among the largest land predators in the northern hemisphere, with males during peak autumn weight commonly topping 800 pounds and sometimes pushing past 1,200. During the salmon run, dominant males aggressively hold prime fishing pools against anything they see as competition. A single forelimb strike can shatter bone, and claws up to 4 inches long open deep lacerations on contact. Bears accustomed to dense salmon runs tolerate close proximity and react fast to competition around productive pools, and encounters where a person can't move freely are the most dangerous kind. Gorelikov later described what happened next. Pashkov heard the warning and started backing toward shore. But the riverbed was slick cobblestone, big uneven rocks, and the current was working against him. In chest waders on that kind of bottom, every step is slow and awkward. The bear closed the gap faster than Pashkov could move. At around 30 yards, its body language changed, ears going flat, pace picking up. At 20, it was charging through the shallows straight at him. Pashkov tried to move faster, and lost his footing on the cobble. He went down hard. Water flooded over the top of the waders as he struggled to regain footing, and the current and waterlogged gear made it nearly impossible to stand on the slick cobblestones. The rocks, the current, the soaked neoprene, it all worked against him at once. The bear was on him within seconds, massive strikes and bites to the head and upper body, while Pashkov lay partially submerged, unable to get to his feet. Gorelikov fired from the bank. The bear didn't pull off. A second round impacted the water and rocks directly beside it. The bear finally broke away, crashing through the alder on the far side. Gorelikov waded in and dragged Pashkov to shore. He'd taken devastating injuries across the head, neck, and shoulders. No response. What makes this one different for me is that Pashkov didn't ignore a warning. He heard Gorelikov, he turned, he tried to leave. He did the right thing, but the river was uneven, and his waders were heavy, and the cobble was slick, and one stumble changed everything. 60 seconds earlier, he could have walked out. After the fall, the river had him. I keep trying to find the moment where a different choice saves his life, and I'm not sure there is one past the point where he waded in. Gorelikov fired twice, stood on the bank, and put rounds toward an 800-pound bear that was on top of his client in the water. I can't imagine what that aim costs you, knowing that a miss in the wrong direction hits the person you're trying to save. Gorelikov got on the radio for a helicopter. It reached them about 40 minutes later. Pashkov had no pulse. He was declared dead before they made it to any facility. Investigators cleared Gorelikov, noting his positioning, warning, and rifle use were all textbook. The contributing factors were the bear's aggression during salmon season, the riverbed terrain, and loss of mobility from waterlogged waders. The lodge suspended operations for the rest of the salmon run, while authorities reviewed safety procedures. Kamchatka took a man who did almost everything right, and I find that harder to sit with than the stories where someone obviously made a terrible call. The final story is harder still, because it happened in the last place on Earth you'd expect to feel afraid. A garden with path lights and a hedge, and a terrace overlooking one of the most beautiful lakes in Kenya. And the most dangerous animal on the property wasn't in the bush, it was on the lawn. It was August 22, 2018, and the dry season had drawn Lake Naivasha down to a pale blue mirror in Kenya's Rift Valley. The lake was stunning. Papyrus along the edges, fish eagles overhead, luxury villas and flower farms lining the shore. From any terrace, it could pass for the Italian countryside. But Naivasha was home to one of Kenya's densest hippo populations. Every night, the animals climbed out of the water and grazed on the manicured lawns of lakeside properties. This wasn't occasional. It happened every night and had been going on for decades. Every caretaker knew. Every local knew. The villa came through a European travel agency. Manicured gardens, stone terrace, bougainvillea hedges, solar-powered path lights running down a flagstone walkway to the water. It looked like a Mediterranean resort. Nothing about it said danger. Ansgar Wenderoth, a 38-year-old heir to a German automotive components fortune, had arrived 2 days earlier with a group of friends. He'd traveled plenty, cities and islands and beach resorts, but had basically no experience with African wildlife outside of one daytime game drive. Wycliffe Odiambo, the property's 52-year-old caretaker, who'd been managing the place for over a decade, sat the group down on arrival. The instructions were straightforward. Don't walk the grounds after dark. Hippos graze on the lawn every night. Stay on the terrace or stay inside once the sun goes down. The first night they heard them from the terrace. Deep grunting, heavy footfalls somewhere in the darkness past the solar lights. The group thought it was exciting, atmospheric. I've watched videos of hippos grazing on Naivasha lawns at night, and it's surreal. They look almost peaceful, just eating grass under the garden lights like enormous cattle. And then you read what happens when people get between them and the water, and realize those same animals are behind more fatal encounters than most large predators in the region. There's a gap between how hippos look on a lawn and what they actually are, and I think that gap is more dangerous than any animal behavior. August 22nd, the second evening. The group had been out on the terrace for hours. Around 11, Wenderoth's friends headed inside. Wenderoth didn't follow. His phone turned up the next morning on the lawn about 30 yards from the terrace, near the water's edge, the camera application still active. Investigators believe he walked down the garden path toward the lake. Camera app open. That's the detail that tells me everything. He walked down a garden path in the dark, toward a lake where 3,000-pound animals were grazing, because he wanted a photograph. I've tried to reconstruct what he was thinking, and the closest I can get is that the property just didn't feel dangerous. It felt like a resort, and resorts are safe. Hippopotamuses are considered among the most dangerous large animals in Africa. Adults commonly weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. Most people think of them as water animals, but hippos spend their nights grazing on land, and cropped lawns are exactly the ground they prefer. On land, they react aggressively to anything that blocks or surprises them on the route back to water. Despite their bulk, they can outrun a person over short distances. Their jaws open extraordinarily wide, with massive tusk-like canines capable of catastrophic injuries. Odhiambo was in the staff quarters, about 150 yards from the main house. Around 11:20 that night, he heard a deep grunt, the heavy thud of something big moving fast across the lawn, and one shout. He grabbed his flashlight and ran. He found Wenderoth on the lawn, maybe 30 yards from the water's edge. A large hippo was already hauling toward the lake at speed, smashing through the hedge at the shore. The path between the terrace and the lake showed torn-up grass and solar lights knocked sideways, overturned solar lights. For some reason, that image won't leave me alone. Those little garden stakes you see at any hardware store, knocked sideways in the grass next to a man who'd just been killed by a hippo. Something about the smallness of those lights next to the scale of what happened makes me feel like the whole property was a set. It looked like safety. It was decorated like safety. And it wasn't. From the injuries and where Wenderoth ended up, it was clear he'd gotten between the hippo and the water. The animal's response was instant. Massive, crushing injuries to the torso from the bite, plus blunt force trampling damage. The whole thing lasted seconds. Odhiambo called for an ambulance. It got there from Naivasha town in about 25 minutes. Wenderoth wasn't breathing and was pronounced dead at the district hospital. Investigators noted there were no barriers between the gardens and the lakeshore, standard for every property on the lake. Odhiambo confirmed he'd told the group about the hippos on day one. Nobody was charged. There was some talk about requiring fences, but nothing came of it. The travel agency pulled the villa from its website for a few months, then quietly put it back up. I've looked at listing photos of lakeside villas on Naivasha, and they all look like that. Trimmed hedges, solar walkways, terraces with cushions, views of the lake. Not one of them mentions hippos in the main description. You have to dig into the fine print or hope your caretaker cares enough to tell you, the way Odhiambo did. He told them. He looked them in the eye and explained what grazed on that lawn after dark. And 2 nights later, a man walked down. The lit path, anyway. I keep coming back to Odhiambo because he's done this for a decade. I wonder how many guests he's warned. I wonder how many of them listened.